Hi Beats, it's EKG. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I will be continuing a series that I'm going to be starting on my channel in which I recommend books based on musicians, and so far I did SZA. If you haven't seen that video, check it out. But essentially I go off of the artist's music, their style, their energy, their essence, and also a little background about their life, and then I take all of that information and hit you with some book recs. So if you would like to see what I recommend you read, if you love listening to Jhené Aiko's music, you can just keep on watching. So first I want to start off with just what I know of from Jhené Aiko and her starting off in her music career. I know that she was basically working as a waitress, and at the start of her career she was faced with the loss of her brother. So just based off of that information, I'm going to recommend that you read Writers and Lovers by Lily King. Writers and Lovers is just basically a story that is following a young woman, and she is faced with immense grief. She's in the process of wanting to become a writer, and it's just really showing her at the most vulnerable start of her career. It's very sad girl energy. Jhené is a Pisces queen, and I just feel like she would really ruminate in her feelings the way that the main character of this novel does. I think the story could relate a lot to you if you like Jhené Aiko. I personally, when I'm listening to her, I appreciate her vulnerability, and that's what you get from the main character in this story. You also have some like toxic relationships thrown in there, which we'll get into a little bit as the video goes on. And yeah, I just think that Writers and Lovers would be a good book if you love Jhené Aiko, specifically if you like any of her earlier projects. Thinking of Sailing Souls, maybe a little Sold Out in there too, just off of the fact that in Writers and Lovers, Casey, the main character, really goes into detail about her grief, her depression from it, her anxiety. So trying to make it in a creative field and just following her passions. And I think that aligns perfectly with Jhené Aiko. Next, we're gonna go into some like categories of like spiritual enlightenment, which we know Jhené Aiko, she is the queen of sound bowls. I know that she's very in tune with the universe. She's definitely a chakra, mystical, spiritual bae. And I'm gonna recommend some books to you just based off of that. And the first book that I want to recommend is The 4 Agreements. This book is super easy to read. It's very knowledgeable, it's very insightful, but the Toltec wisdom, and I feel like Jhené Aiko is definitely into that. I know for her album, she goes to Hawaii to just be in nature and just to like listen and be reflective while she's delivering and creating work. And I know for her most latest album, Chilumbo, every song is written using specific sounds and frequencies in order to heal certain chakras. I think the 4 Agreements kind of goes in hand with just like the spiritual enlightenment, or just kind of like bettering yourself, self-improvement, healing those traumas that we have, you know, those childhood traumas that try to sneak up on you. This is just, you know, we'll give you some quick, easy tips just on how to be a better person, how not to allow those things to impact you, to rise above the BS. And I want to do an honorable mention in this just because I have not read this book in such a long time, but I just know the basis of it from when I read it in high school, and I think that it goes hand in hand with Jhené Aiko and her spiritualness. And that book is Siddhartha. Once again, it's all about enlightenment. It kind of just follows like the story of Buddha. It is very in line with the book that I also talk about all the time, The Alchemist. This would be right up your alley. I'm thinking about like Trip and Sold Out, just like some of those songs that are just very introspective and reflective, and just kind of talk about letting go of your earthly attachments. And the main character is a prince. He renounces all of his worldly possessions and wants to live a life just strictly off the land, of suffering. And at the end, we get to some sort of enlightenment or some sort of bettering of oneself. And I feel like that's what Jhené Aiko talks a lot about in, I was about to say in her poetry too, but also just overall, like in her music, in her life. She's just very Zen queen, you know? We love that. We love a Zen moment. Okay, so following along the lines of Trip, the album, I have to recommend a book that I think if one was, you know, on said trip with Jhené, listening to the album, if you know what I mean, I think a story that you would kind of relate to, or that could potentially happen if you were listening to the album of Trip, you know, would be Haroun and the Sea of Stories. I mean, just look at this cover. Number one, like, let's talk about it. The cover is so vibrant, so beautiful. I feel like it perfectly matches Trip, the album cover. And basically, Haroun and the Sea of Stories follows the main character on his quest to restore his father's storytelling gift. And within this, he has to go to the Sea of Stories, which has been poisoned. He encounters talking animals, just plants and stuff that move. The earth is doing weird, cool things. Haroun and the Sea of Stories would definitely just be a fun journey that you could go on that would kind of like encapture some of the things that I think Jhené Aiko would have witnessed in Trip, the album. I love this book. You would especially enjoy it too if you like storytelling, if you like the idea that we all have natural gifts within us, which I think also aligns perfectly with Jhené Aiko. So next I'm going to circle back to just Jhené Aiko's ability to really go in with relationships. I feel like she has a very realistic and raw interpretation of relationships. And I have to recommend Normal People by Sally Rooney. I think if you love Jhené Aiko, you would love Normal People. It follows Marianne and Connell. I'm sure at this point you're all familiar with the story, but it just follows them through life. It's just a very honest representation of a relationship, especially one where you're young. And I feel like Jhené talks a lot about her relationships when she was younger, just the ways that they failed, the ways that they were good, what she learned from them. And I feel like Normal People is exactly that. You would for sure love Normal People if you love Jhené Aiko. Just give it some time. Like, there's no quotations in here, just a warning. So just be prepared for the story, like the writing style, to be a little different than what you normally read, but the meat and bones of the story is really good. And I kind of like it the more I sit with it. Lastly, I just want to recommend a poetry collection, and that would be Tupac Shakur's The Rose That Grew from Concrete. If you watched my Jhené Aiko poetry book review video, I mentioned this one briefly as well, but I read this a while ago, and then I did like a roasting slightly of Jhené Aiko's poetry collection. And I think that Jhené Aiko is very inspired by Tupac. You know, the LA Jhené Aiko is this Lost and Queen. She's from LA, and she just really relates to Tupac in his messaging. In her own way, is influenced by his music. And this poetry collection specifically, you get insight into Tupac's writing. You do see some of his song lyrics, which I think Jhené Aiko used in her poetry collection, as well as just the overall style and construction of this specific poetry collection. And then I think if you read this and then read her own poetry collection, you would see where this recommendation is coming from. But essentially, Tupac wasn't originally from LA, but kind of became like the LA poster child during the 90s. Legendary, iconic rapper who was gone too soon. And I think Jhené Aiko relates to him a lot. And I think you would love this if you love her. All right, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know who else you want to see me do. I am so excited. I love doing these books, especially when I am obsessed with the artist. So just let me know. And if our spirits align in the request, then I'll definitely put the video up for you. And also I want to give a shout out to Alexandria the Great. Oh my God, she said do Jhené Aiko next. And I was like, yes, girl, I got you. And yeah, Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.
And I was like, yo.